Hey everybody, today I'd like to go on with our speedometer project, and if you still have your original speedometer in your bus, such as the silver sides or the 4103s or a more universal type speedometer or the newer type like what fit the transits and the 4104s. So what we'll do today is go through repairing your electric speedometer. So to work with tools, we should have a small crescent wrench. We should have a 1/4-inch nut driver. This should be our 5/16 nut driver, I believe it is, the yellow one. And then this is the blue one. This is the 21, or 3/8 rather, number 12 spin tight. And the little smaller one. These two, the blue and the green, this is 11/32. This is 3/16. These two are for the nuts on your terminal boards, on your junction boxes. These two fit the nuts. These fit the nuts on the back of the gauges on your instrument panel. A flat blade screwdriver. And Radio Shack used to sell these bundles of test leads. Anytime you're doing any electrical work on your bus whatsoever, you should have a whole bunch of these test leads. They used to be available at Radio Shack. Now you can buy them on Amazon. So pick up a couple packages of these test leads. Should have a little brush like this, a little fiber brush. Have a can of oil handy. I love these oil cans with the capillary tube, the zoom spouts. You should have a little bit of this lubricator on hand if you like that. We're going to put a touch of grease in the bearings on these speedometers. I'll show you that later. Have a can of deoxit handy. This is what you want to use to clean your terminals and all your little nuts and bolts that go on the studs in your J boxes. So, oh yes, and Kleenex. A box of tissue. That doesn't have to be Kleenex. And be sure that you get the non-lotion. I discovered that one brand of these puffs tissues is lotionized. That might be nice for your hands and nose, but you don't want that when you're cleaning parts here. So that's what we have for a tool. Now, so the next part of this will be getting the parts out of the bus, and I'll show you that in a minute here. So I'll start with bringing in from the bus, bring it into a nice clean workbench area. You could put a nice table on your, nice cloth on your dining room table and work in your dining room, or you can move your project into the kitchen, or if you have work, anyway, a nice clean work surface. This is the motor driver for the speedometer. You'll find this in the back of your bus, somewhere above the transmission. You'll find this speedometer cable with a square end, which goes into the motor driver. The keyed end, which goes into the transmission. Then you'll find the speedometer. Here is one out of a silver sides. Here's one out of a 4103. This is the unit that's mounted in your instrument panel. It is electrically connected to the motor driver by these 4-pin Amphenol connectors. I forgot to turn this light on, so I'll do that right now. Bear with me. It takes like All right, now we can see these 4-pin Amphenol connectors. You'll see a similar connector on the back of the motor driver. And you will see the Amphenol connector. Which is this. There's one attached to the motor driver. As you saw in my last video, it was corroded away to nothing. I have some new Amphenol connectors, 4-pin female plugs, I should call these. Amphenol plugs, 4-pin female, that I have ordered. And I'll be using some of those clip leads that I showed you. So, we're going to begin with, or I'm going to begin with, I have that habit of saying we. By the way, I want to say hi to you. I should have done that to start with. So we're going to start by taking the motor driver apart. What happens is these buses sit for years and years, and the motor seizes up because the grease in the bearings dries. And they have to be very friction-free because they carry such a light energy. So remove the 4 screws that hold the motor drive together and gently pull the back cover off. Very gently so something doesn't drop. And this is what you'll see. These are so simple. Engineers back in the 30s and 40s just designed things simply and they worked well. The first thing you want to check, by the way, I have these little probes that I use for radio work, and they're very handy for this. Get your little probe or a little screwdriver or whatever you have, and make sure that this brush moves freely. Corrosion occurs around the edge of these brushes, and since I'm looking into the light, I can't always see what. Make sure this brush slides in and out freely. If it doesn't, use some of this dioxide to spray in there carefully. Don't flood it. Just get enough in there to work this. And by the way, try and keep your hands off of these brushes. These are electrical surfaces that need perfect contact. So make sure that moves really freely like that. And make sure the surface of that is clean by spraying some of this dioxide on a tissue and then wipe that. And then at the same time, wipe around the edge of that. And wipe that surface off to make sure it's perfectly clean. See that? This carbon element has to rub against this solid copper commutator. So clean this solid copper commutator also with your deoxit or whatever brand of contact cleaner you like to use. You have to use a brand of contact cleaner that's a non-lubricant. Because, again, this has to be a perfect electrical contact surface with this little brush. Okay, next. Next thing, check this bearing now. And make sure this bearing turns, because this bearing, from years of sitting, will adhere to this shaft. And so this bearing has to rotate smoothly. Get some oil in here and get that to lubricate smoothly. Work it in. Inside of here, it's a ball bearing assembly. And make sure that moves smoothly. And then keep oil away from the contacts. Keep wiping this. Now, you'll also notice now, here are two brushes. You see this assembly? There are two brushes that are rotating like this, and what they're doing is carrying electrical current from this point, which is this, which is the DC minus hot. Remember, the old buses have positive ground. Now, I'm assuming that you have a bus that has not been modified yet. I'm not dealing with buses that are modified at this time. If they are, you can ask me for help getting through these. But this is the hot terminal, and that transmits through this brush 12 volts DC into this armature. Now, what that armature does is now communicate 12 volts DC to all of these see these little separate pieces? As this rotates, that 12 volts DC is transmitted to each of these sections, which are wired so that that 12 volt DC is pulsating in a rotary motion governed by the speed of your vehicle going down the road, transmitting that pulsating DC voltage into this 4-pin Amphenol connector, which I showed you. It's hard for me to see what I'm doing because the light is blinding me. So that motion is what causes the speedometer needle to move. So now, here we go. I'm going to pull this out very carefully. Watch out for this gasket in here. Try not to lose that gasket. Try not to move it at all. Now, take your tissue that you still have some of that dioxide and move it around in here and clean the surface of these little copper junction points. See each one of those little copper points. Is an electrical contact point. Now, dab a little bit of your lubriplate or whatever you have, a light-duty lubricating grease. Don't use Vaseline because it melts right away. So a little bit of that, and so have some oil in there, but make sure that this Bakelite surface here is clean. Make sure there's no crud. Make sure there's no oil. If there's any oil on the surface of these contact points, they will act as an insulator. Now, with the armature, make sure that both of these bearings turn freely. Spin them with your hand. It's okay. You can touch this with your hand because oil residue on these is perfectly fine. Just keep oil residue off of the electrical parts. See, make sure there's no oil on these. Now the next thing to do is be sure that these springs on these move. Be sure you can move these brushes. They're spring loaded. Be sure you can move both of them. Next thing you want to do is take your flat blade screwdriver and loosen these screws and tighten them a couple of times. That wears the patina and the corrosion off those contact points. You see here? See where the contact from the brush, just like an electric motor. Move those, make sure that's nice and tight. Don't force it or you'll strip the Bakelite threading. Now that you've handled it all, we're going to put it back together. And so again, You know, you can't wipe these too many times. Just keep that in mind. But this has to be clean and dry. Now, reassemble the armature into the main body. I like to do it like this. I like to push the brush down. I think my hand is in the way here. Push that brush in. Put your index finger on the other brush and slide this assembly back in to that lubricated socket that was at the base. Okay? Now this is in. See how this turns? And see how the brushes make different contact points here? Okay, now, again, carefully assemble this. Oh, by the way, before you take this apart, remember how you did it. The hot terminal matches up with the casting holding the socket, okay? So now, slip that in so that the brush goes over the contact. I use these little probes, push the brush in, so it drops down onto that contact, and then line this back up again and put the screws back in it. If you lose one of these are number 8 by 832. They're 832 bolts, and they only go in one way. And get this screwed back together. So that's done. Next thing is get in here and clean these contacts. Clean this socket. Again, you can use your deoxide. Get in there and clean that socket. Spray that out and use your brush and get in there and twirl that brush around. Twirl that brush around. And look in, make sure there's no junk in there, no pieces of wire or anything that'll short out these fins. Blow it out. Take a dry piece of Kleenex or tissue. I don't know if I can say Kleenex without violating copyrights or not. I'm not advertising Kleenex. Whatever brand of tissue you have, just make damn sure that it doesn't have hand lotion in it. Okay, now you can screw that back together. And the next part of the project is the speedometer cable. We want to get lubrication on the speedometer cable. So I'll take some lubriplate and just kind of smear it on here a little bit. This stuff doesn't get hard in cold weather. And although it'll melt in a hot engine compartment, it keeps lubricating, whether it's melted or not. And then slide that back in the cable housing and spin it around a little. And that's all you'll need to do with that. Be sure that this cable housing is nice and clear and clean. And the same, by the way, with the speedometer cable. Make sure the speedometer cable isn't twisted or frayed, because if there are any loose wires on the speedometer cable, they'll catch on the inside of this housing and jam everything. So make sure that that turns nicely. If yours is destroyed or impossible to repair, we have these on hand. Next is the speedometer head. The same problem you had with the motor driver can also occur with the speedometer. In here is the motor that's being driven by this generator. So mark where you're taking it apart. Otherwise, the window for the instrument panel lights won't match up. So be sure that you mark this so you get this on right, or otherwise the light is going to straddle the openings instead of going into the openings. I have loosened these screws already with a flat screwdriver. Use one that fits nice and tight across the whole head of the screw so you don't strip the screw head. Now the first thing I want to do is clean the inside of the glass and carefully wipe off the dial face. By the way, I just dropped a screw because there was some grease on my hand and the screw stuck to my finger and then let go when I had my hand over the rug. So anyway, get those off. Now, with one of the tools you have handy, tap like this. Gently tap, because this shell is corroded to the main casting. So you need to tap it to break it loose. And once you see it start to separate, you can get your screwdriver in here. It would be a good idea not to take these bolts out until you've done this part. Keep these bolts in to hold the rear assembly together. And then fiddle around until you can get this front shell off. You know you're getting somewhere when it starts sounding hollow. This takes patience. Sometimes it's taken me over an hour to get one of these loose because they corrode in here. So here you are. See this corrosion? This is what glues it. Okay, this is the inside. Inside here is the motor part. I'll show you. Here's a little magnetic pickup that responds to the motor. And this is the shaft to the needle. And in here, you can see the mechanism that operates the odometer. See this little gear here? It's run by this assembly here. See here, the little worm gear coming from the motor? That's running this gear that operates the odometer. And there's crud in here. You can see crud in there. And this is not deathly urgent cleaning this part of it. There are many of them I don't bother cleaning, but you can do it if you want to, if you have the time and patience. Okay. This dial is stained. So you can see that not much is going to come off of it. Be careful you don't bend the needle. So set that down someplace where it does not roll away from you. And come in here and clean the inside of the glass with a clean tissue and a little bit of glass cleaner. Here's my glass cleaner here. Spray a little bit of glass cleaner in there, like that, and wipe this glass. And do it on both sides at the same time so you can look through it and see that it's clean. Also, wipe along the inside here to get the inside of these little windows clean, where the instrument panel bulb illuminates the dial face of the speedometer. Now, put that back together and remember where you had your mark? Right there, where I put my mark. Where is the mark on here? There it is. So I'm going to slide this back in carefully. Now, some of you guys will admit that you don't have a lot of finesse with your hands, and I understand that. So it's a good idea if you have your son or your daughter around to help you with this, or your wife. So now I'll put these screws back in. I'm only going to do 2 now because I don't want to take up a lot of video time. But I'll just put 1 in now. That secures this so it doesn't come apart. Now we're going to go back to the motor part. And again, being very careful. Might have to tap it to get it loose. Once you see it separate, then go ahead and pry it. Very carefully slide this out. Very carefully. Look at here. Remember those pulses of electrical energy being created by this? All right. Here's where it transmits the magnetic energy. Each of these coils is wired to those little terminals you saw on that ring. So as that motor driver spins, it sends electrical pulses into these coils, which creates electrical energy, magnetic energy, just like an electric motor. And this is what spins as a result of that electrical energy. Put a little drop of oil down in here. One drop. And turn this until it spins like that. See how nice that spins? Okay. Look what happens when you spin that. Look at there, see? The dial moves. See that? Okay. Now, again, by the way, you don't remove this. Leave this alone. Now check this bearing again. This is just like the other one. Put a little drop of oil on it. Like that. And spin it like that till it's nice and loose. Okay? Now take a little bit of your cleaner and clean this armature. Like that. Make sure that you get any gunk off of that. Now, in here, clean this. Clean these laminated electromagnets. See that? Look in here, and you can see that's dry, just as dry as a bone. So put a little dab of lubricate in there. And put the cap back on stuff. If you don't put the cap on while it's still in your hand, you're going to lose it. The cap. Now, very carefully, and remember where you marked it? Very carefully slide that back together. Very carefully. See that? By the way, if there's a gasket in here, be careful that you don't misplace it. line those holes up. And squeeze it together and put the screws back in. Sometimes you have to diddle around a little bit to get them in. Just like that. All right. Some of these will take a 1/4-inch nut driver, and some of them feel like they're a metric, like this one. See, the 1/4-inch slipped right over this one, but it won't slip over this one. And that's where your little crescent wrench comes in handy. Tighten that down, snug it. Don't force it, just snug it. Okay, then you can finish putting these screws back in. And I'll put one on each side for now, and I'll put the rest of them together later. We don't need to take up video time with that. And while I'm at it, I want to say hello to all you subscribers. I really appreciate it. I really enjoy having you subscribe. And be sure and leave a comment. Tell me what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like to see. And we'll do a few things now and then. Okay, so for now, that's it. Now it's time to test everything. So for that, I have my handy dandy electric drill. I have the motor driver, and so I'm going to screw the speedometer cable. The square end goes into the speedometer driver unit. I'm going to screw this together just as if it was on the bus. And then this end, push it in to make sure that it's in that far. If it's out, it means it's not slid in here properly. So make sure that it slides in. So about 3/4 of an inch is protruding. Now, here's where the cable connectors go. Now, what I do is, just so that I remember how things go, in radio work, we have a color code. And the color code is black is 0, brown is 1, red is 2, orange is 3, yellow is 4, green is 5, and 6 is blue. And that's as far as we have to go now. And the reason I'm saying that is because I know that now I can remember how to connect and reconnect these. So I'm getting close, because this is terminal A, so I'm using a number that's closest to A. So if A is 1, the closest color I have is red, which is 2. The next thing is terminal B. This is the end that goes into the speedometer drive, and this is the end that goes into your rear junction box. This came off of a bus that met its fate by sitting in a parking lot and rotting away to nothing. It had a good engine, and the camera stopped again, so I'll try and pick it up here. So now what I want to do is, remembering this color code thing, I want to connect this cable to the driver. So remembering A is 1 and wire red is 2, so that's the closest. And remember, here's how it goes. This is how see the keyway? Here's the keyway in the motor driver. Can you see that keyway there? If you can see that. So, looking at this, number A, which I will call number 1, which is red wire, because number 2 is closest to number 1. So beginning with A here, now I'm going to connect that, slide that alligator clip down on that pin, and slide the red sleeve down. And then the next one was the yellow, because pin 2 is closest to 4 and yellow is 4. Pin C, which is 3, is closest to 5. I know this sounds nuts, but you get the idea. It's my crazy way of remembering which wires go to what, using that color code system. It saves me a lot of thinking and a lot of memory work. So now I have all 4 of these wires on all 4 pins in the driver. Next, I'll connect the speedometer cable. Remember, the square end goes into the square shaft on the driver. The next thing I'll do is, using this keyway to hold it, I will turn this to be sure that this cable is in and turning the motor driver, which it is. Now I'll line this little keyway up with the drill chuck, and I'll slide this drill chuck in like that and tighten the chuck. So now we're holding everything together, and I'll use this little camera holder that I found on Facebook. It holds the speedometer nicely. See that? How nicely it'll hold that speedometer, crooked. So I just turn the speedometer and set it in this cradle. But before I do that, I'll connect the cable. The Amphenol plug goes into the back of the speedometer. This plug and socket are the same on both ends. Up front in the speedometer head, and in back by the Now I connect the negative hot to the negative hot on the motor driver, and the positive ground to the positive ground on the motor driver. And if everything is connected right, we should see the speedometer work. If we plug the drill in, if I plug the drill in, there goes the wee thing again. See this? Can you see the motor As I speed up the drill, you see what happens to the speedometer? No, you can't because it's too far away. I'll bring it up closer. Here I go. I'm going to trigger the drill. Just as if I was driving down the street. Can you see the odometer also moving? So that's how it works. I hope you enjoyed this little session. And if you have an opportunity to pick up a bus that still has the original speedometer stuff in it, keep this video handy. Give me a call or email me at busoldman@gmail.com. Busoldmanphil. Sorry about that. It's busoldmanphil@gmail.com. And I'll be glad to answer any questions. I hope you enjoyed this little combination history and technical session. Thank you. Enjoy your subscriptions. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for your comments, and comment on each other's comments. That's how we communicate. That's how we learn things. So I'll see you later. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye, and God bless you all.